can hear me, clap once. If you can hear me, clap twice. I am an 80-year-old trapped in a 27-year-old body. Are there any others out here that are like me who knit? Fantastic. I know Lauren has. She admitted to it earlier. So it's really important. I asked because there's a micro population of knitters, and it's a really great stress reliever. So if you haven't yet, you ought to. But you're kind of probably wondering, why knitting? Well, how does knitting have anything to do with education? And I have to tell you, knitting is so ingrained in who I am. It has everything to do with education. So I'm going to make it relevant. Why do you guys care about knitting? Why do you care about knitting?
No.
It can be lucrative if you sell the hats you make.
It's true. You don't? I can tell you, who here has worn a t-shirt? Who here has worn a sweater? You guys, all those little V patterns, that's all knitting. I would say 99% of the clothing we wear is either knitted or woven. If you look at your pants, those are woven. If you look at your shirts, unless you're wearing like a collared shirt, that's all knitted material, and nice and stretchy. So we care about knitting because we like to wear clothes. So that's a really good thing. I'm actually surprised that none of the boys here knit or crochet. I know quite a few. My husband knits, my brother crochets, my dad broke his leg and picked up knitting just to get rid of some nervous tension because he couldn't exercise. So never make assumptions that boys don't knit, because they do more often than not. Maggie knows. So that's why we care. Let's see. I think I'm a self-taught knitter, and that's why I think I love it so much, and that's why it's so passionate. And those things that you teach yourself, those things you discover on your own, even if you have a guide, are the things that you remember most. So it's really important when we're teaching that we're guiding that learning process, because that's what's going to stick. That's what they're going to remember forever, and that's what they're going to fall back on, just like I've done that with knitting. Believe it or not, guys, knitting is really easy. I'm going to turn around. I'm going to show you two stitches. The first is the knit stitch. Knitting is actually just one stitch, and then it's opposite, and then it's just variations on those twos. Lisa's looking at me like she doesn't believe me, but I'm here to tell you that anyone can do this. So I'm going to turn around because it'll be easier for you guys to see. I brought the big needles. This is the knit stitch. So you go in through the back, you loop it around counterclockwise, and you pull that loop off. That is the knit stitch. Do a few more just for repetition's sake. You got to ingrain those things. And the next is the purl, and that's its opposite. So the knit stitch, we went in from the front into the back. The purl stitch is its opposite, so we're going to start from the back and go through the front, and then again counterclockwise. And that is the opposite of the purl stitch, or the knit stitch, excuse me, called the purl stitch. So that is everything that I have on this table was made using those two stitches, pretty exclusively. There's no variation. So just like in education, you got to start really simply. The knit stitch is the simplest stitch, and then you throw in a little twist, and it gets a little bit more complex with the purl stitch, even though it's really similar. And then you do those back and forth, and you get different patterns. And so just like education, you start really simple, and you kind of expand it out. So you start with just knit every row, and you get this. Knit every row. It's great. It's a great pattern, lots of texture. If you guys want to pass that around, you might as well check it out. When you alternate knit and purl, and you get your lines right up, you get the moss stitch. This is knit and purl every other. So those were two pretty simple stitches, but they make a really complex pattern when you really build on them. So just like education, start from simple and you get a lot more complex. Then eventually, however, you get bored with scarves. Eventually, those just don't do it for you anymore. Just like education, you can only add single digits for so long before you're ready for a challenge, and we have to offer those challenges to our students. So you start with the knit every row. You have the alternate, and then you get into lace, because you got to mix it up a little bit. You got to make it complicated. This looks complicated, and I'm not going to tell you it's not. It does take practice, because you never tell somebody that it's easy, right? Right, Dixie? I learned that today. That's my insight for today. You have to give yourself the challenge. And believe it or not, guys, this is knit and purl over and over and over again. And I threw a yarn over. That's made out of yak, actually. So, mix it up, make it exciting. You got to get interested. So you also have to, make sure, if you get burnt out on scarves, you got to move on to the next. Just like you're in education, if you get burnt out on a grade, or if you get burnt out on teaching something a specific way, you really have to change it up. Switch. If you just can't stand 5th graders anymore, maybe you should think about 1st graders, or maybe you should think about something else. So eventually, when scarves don't do it for you anymore, you get into 3D. And you get into hats. You start simple, basic hat form. And then you get more complex. So you add a brim, maybe, to your hat. Liven it up a little bit, change the top.
You know what I've been trying to find is a hole in the back of the hat for my ponytail, and I can't find one anymore.
Yeah. You can make one. Or I can tell you where to buy one. And then you get into even more complicated stripes along the side. You have to notice, though, just like education, you have to persevere and you have to finish, and you have to have follow through. One of my vices with knitting is that I never finish the inside of my hats. So you'll always see strings. I think the pink one got done, but oftentimes there's strings hanging out. So you have to persevere. You have to make sure you do a complete job. You can't stop halfway through, or half a mile around the road, which is something I clearly haven't been able to do with my knitting, but I promise to do with my education. When you don't know how to do something, oh, here's some more hats you guys want to see. When you don't know how to do something, you have to find somebody who does. So there's a lot of techniques, that little striped hat, for example, that Carla has, where I haven't been able to do something, and I've gone to YouTube to find out how to knit something. So if you don't know how to do something, you got to go to somebody who does, and that's something I would encourage parents, I would encourage teachers, your students to do, is to find those resources. The best study technique I ever found was one where I learned that the index existed in a book. If you can't read the chapter and you have questions, you go to the index. There's tricks and there's ways to get through and to find the information you need that's pertinent to what you need without having to go through everything. And that's actually my poignant example is this pocket. These pockets were a nightmare, and I got to them and couldn't quite finish them. And so YouTube, thank you YouTube, and the lady who taught me, who recorded herself knitting pockets. YouTube. And again, I have more of my unfinished projects. Just to reiterate, I have a bunch of these like little baby booties because they're quick and they're fast and they're easy. You want to make sure that with your students, you are giving them quick, easy things to feel successful and get done, but then that's why I'm starting a new hat, is so I can feel successful and not have to think about it. Before I take on something more complex like this epically long scarf that's taken me forever and a day to work on. Lastly, I want to talk about balance. Balance is huge for me because I tend to be a little type A and I tend to lean towards that person. So I've really been trying to balance things out. The same is within an education. You have to have a well-balanced education. We're here to create well-rounded individuals and play to their strengths. Knitting is no different. I knit this little square for you guys. And I've purposely knitted in flaws. We have like a run, so if you miss something, it'll totally unravel on you. You got to remember that. You have to make sure that you're maintaining nice, well, even balanced lesson. You need to make sure that you're meeting all those needs. Otherwise, you're going to end up with holes, and you're going to end up with those runs. There's another one in here that's pretty good. Because otherwise things unravel and you get incomplete stuff. I know a lot of people have ended with a story, but instead I'd like you guys to turn to a partner or somebody sitting at your table and just share with each other what you've learned, what you like most about this class, or anything else to end. Because I think peer-to-peer reflection and teaching peer-to-peer is, one of the best things that you can do for your students. Thanks. And if you want to look at any of this other stuff, I didn't
been really good. Yeah.
I tried, and it's frustrating. You're hardcore.
Yeah, I want you to take my seat. And then you'll get that education.